All right, team, welcome back to the Man Talk Show. Connor Beaton here. And today, this video is going to be talking about shadow work for the anxious attachment. First and foremost, what is the anxious attachment? Well, I have a whole video on a man's guide to anxious attachment. Hopefully you've watched that. If not, go queue it up. But a very simple version that I'm going to give you right here is that an anxious person, their internal experience is, my world is not okay unless you are okay. So for the anxious partner, they are constantly looking for cues, looking for evidence that their partner is okay, their husband, their wife, their boyfriend, their girlfriend. They're looking to see, are you all right? Because if you're okay, then maybe I can be okay. But if you're not okay, then I am disrupted. And so the anxious attached person learned, or didn't learn, let's just say didn't learn, how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to basically get their internal homeostasis to a baseline on their own. And through different circumstances and events, what they learned was, I need somebody else in order for me to reclaim any type of baseline, to reclaim any type of homeostasis, peace, calmness, grounding inside of me. Where shadow work comes into play, for those of you that don't know, quick little synopsis of shadow work. I have a bunch of videos on this, more coming on this soon. But shadow work is the shadow is a piece of Jungian psychology. Jung actually created the concept of the shadow. And the shadow is essentially the part of your personality that it sort of lives in your unconscious mind. It's the part of you that you don't know about, you don't like, you don't want other people to know about. It's an amalgamation. I call it the hurt locker sometimes of your fears, your worries, your doubts. And for some people, specifically the anxiously attached people, some of their shadow is very forward facing. So it's very front and center. It gets projected out into the relationship a lot. Those fears, those insecurities, those worries, those doubts, where a lot of people, their shadow is sort of hidden and sequestered away from relationships and sort of shows up in more, we'll say, dubious ways, right? It's very unintentional, unconscious ways. For the anxious person, it's very front and center. Those fears, those insecurities, they're right there. They're driving your behavior. They're causing you to text bomb. They're causing you to constantly worry in your head, like, are they okay? Do they still love me? They still want to be with me? Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but I'm sure I got some of that right. And so in your shadow, it's very common that for the anxious person, what's in their shadow is safety, security, groundedness, authenticity, alignment, self-assuredness, the ability to self-regulate. All of those things have been not rejected or denied, but they've been pushed out of the conscious part of your psyche and your identity and your personality. And so the reclamation, and this is why shadow work is so important for the anxious person. It is as well for the avoidant. I'm going to talk about that in a different video. But this is why it's so important for the anxious attached person. So what do we do with the shadow work? I'm going to give you a couple things that I want you to explore. Okay, these are questions that I would like for you to journal on. This isn't one of those videos that you just like sit and listen to and it's like some cool concepts. I actually want you to do some work to help you unravel some of these pieces. So you might want to pause this part or just write them down, or you can take a note on your phone so you can journal on this later. But I want you to start to identify the shadow self. And there's a series of questions I'm going to give you. So number one, I feel anxious in my relationship when? I feel anxious in my relationship when? And just write out whatever comes to mind, right? When my partner pulls away, when they're gone, when I have to make a decision or whatever it is for you, just write down whatever comes to mind. Number two, this feels similar to my childhood when? This feels similar to my childhood when? And again, just write whatever comes to mind. This is a very unconscious process that you're working with. So you might even write down some examples or memories that come up and you're like, I guess I did feel that way when I was a boy or a girl or whatever. And so just write that down. The next thing is, I'm worried that if I stood up for myself, I'm worried that if I stood up for myself in my relationship, what would happen is, I'm worried what would happen if I stood up for myself. What would happen is. So as the anxious person, it's super important, especially if you're with a more secure partner, to say, hey, here's what I've discovered, and here's what I'd like to start to work on. I'm going to start to ask you more for what I need. I'm going to start to make more decisions myself. I'm going to start to set more boundaries or speak up for myself. Or I'm going to start to tell you when I feel a little angry because that did not feel safe, growing up. I wasn't okay. So you start to communicate with your partner what you're doing so that they know and expect these behavior changes in the relationship, and it's not out of left field for them. And this is going to help them to not kind of get disrupted so that they're with you in this process. So that's a little bit about shadow work. Again, the key here that you are trying to do is reclaim the things that you never really developed. Now, there's one big caveat that I want to put into here, that if you experience some type of trauma or abuse, your anxiety and that anxiousness is probably coming from a little bit of a different place, in the sense that it might be that relationships feel unsafe or just generally are unsafe because of the trauma or the abuse that you have experienced. And so it might be helpful for you to work with somebody through this process, whether it's a coach or a therapist or whatever, so that you can get to the bottom of processing that core wound, that core pain or trauma that caused you to feel very anxious in a relationship. And oftentimes when I've worked with people who have had some type of trauma or abuse growing up that caused an anxious attachment, a couple of things. Often it's very early on in life, or it's tied to something very early on in life, right? Like 2, 3, 4 years old. And secondly, by working through that initial pain and wound, it actually reduces a lot of the anxious behaviors in the relationship because your nervous system starts to acclimate to a very different way of relating and being in relationship. So comment below, let me know what you took away from this video, what you are working on, what you found really helpful. And until next week, Connor Beaton signing off.